All right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our September 25th, 2024 Left to. I'd like to call us to order and take a moment of silence to remember our fallen brothers and sisters, as well as those in our military. Okay, thank you. So as we're looking at the screen, right now we have 3 of our members present. We have 2 virtual. We understand that Representative Berquist is en route or should be here shortly. So we can take the presentations, correct, Steve? We'll do the presentations, but no action can be taken at this time as far as the adoption of our minutes or, direction until we have our quorum. So we will go ahead and hold off on anything that takes an action, but we'll go ahead and start off with Jacob. I believe, Jacob, you're up first. Is that? I think you are.
By way of introduction, this topic was asked for by the board. You wanted us to get an idea of the total amount, total cost, if you will, but the total amount that's in the bank for all the left to retirees after the recent period of inflation. That was a topic that came up during the discussion of the rate adoption. With that, I will turn it over to Jacob to explain to you what we've learned on that.
Okay, one sec, quick tech update here.
So originally, you'll recall it during the rate adoption, the left board or the actuary presented a change in their methodology to represent the fact that for the next 20 years, essentially, or 10 years, they were going to assume that the COLA for all retirees was going to be 3% instead of 2.75 because of all the money in the bank. So the question at that time was how much is in the bank? And
okay.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, as Steve already explained, but I'll go over it again. Issue in front of the board today, and first, for the record, Jacob White, staff to the board. Issue in front of the board today is that recent inflation has greatly exceeded projections, which has created concerns for some retirees about how long it will take for the current COLA to catch up with their lost earning power. And Steve started to explain this, but those projections were the long-term assumed inflation rate was 2.75%. And I'll go over what it's been as we move forward here the last few years. First, I just wanted to step back and talk about COLAs in general. I know we talk a lot about the Left 2 COLA, and I don't know how many people in this room, I know some of the legislators hear a lot about the Plan 1 COLAs. So there's a lot of knowledge about the COLAs within Washington State and the differences between the different plans, but did just want to step back and speak generally about the types of COLAs that exist in other pension plans throughout the country. So the policy goals of a COLA are that they must balance benefit adequacy, which is often defined as protecting the purchase power of retirees, plan sustainability, and plan affordability. I'm going to go into more detail on these as we talk about the different types of COLAs. So I'm not going to go into great detail about each of these, but just to give the board an idea of the different types of COLAs that are out there. And then I'll touch on where the Washington State COLAs land on these different types of COLAs. So you have automatic or ad hoc. Automatic meaning that just every year, typically, retirees get a COLA. Ad hoc is when it only it's passed through the legislature. Simple or compound, meaning that it either the COLA applies to your original pension amount or it adds to the last amount after the previous COLA was added onto your existing pension. Inflation-based or fixed percentage. Many COLAs are tied to inflation, but some plans have them with a fixed percentage. A delayed onset or minimum age. Most plans have some sort of delay. In Washington State, it's just a year. Others have a minimum age before someone can begin receiving a COLA. And then others have it based on investment performance. So if the investment performance is above a certain level, then retirees get a COLA. If it's not, then they don't. And then limited benefit basis. This is typically designed in plans where they're most concerned with the lowest earning retirees, that they concentrate on protecting their benefit from inflation. And so it's only up to a certain amount of your retirement would receive a COLA, and then above that does not. And then self-funded annuities are another option. And I'll talk about this a bit more. And that's just where a retiree at retirement has the option, if their plan doesn't have a COLA, to purchase an annuity as a COLA. Okay, so the pension plan COLAs in Washington State. LEOFF 1, using some of that terminology from the previous slide, is a compounding automatic CPI-based COLA without a cap. And so the main thing to focus on here is that is without a cap. And so talk more about that with LEOFF 2, and I think everyone's already aware of that, but LEOFF 2 having that cap of 3% with banking, that's the big difference between LEOFF 1 and LEOFF 2. And LEOFF 2 is the same as all the other states' Plan 2s with their COLA. Did just want to touch on the other plan ones. So that they have ad hoc COLAs and a self-funded annuity option. People tend not to talk about that self-funded annuity option, but Plan 1 members did have the option at retirement to purchase an annuity that acts as a COLA. It just was not a very popular choice. And so what happens with that ad hoc COLA is that Plan 1 members are continually going to the legislature and asking for a COLA year after year, since it's not automatic in their plan. Okay, so going into a little more detail about the Plan 2 COLA. So it is, first just wanted to mention that it is funded by contribution. So it's pre-funded through employer, member, and state contributions. It's part of the plan, part of the normal cost of the plan that goes into our funding method. It's based on the Seattle-Tacoma Bellevue Consumer Price Index. It's a maximum of 3% and a minimum of 0%. And then if CPI is more than 3%, that overage amount is banked and can be used later. So here's just a simple display of how banking works. That you have that first year, you have 5% inflation. So the member would get a 3% COLA and then bank that additional amount, which could be used the following year. And in this example, where inflation is 1%, it would bump up to 3% using the previous year's banked COLA. Just a simple example of how that works. But here's where we get into the issue in front of the board today is recent inflation. So for a long period of time, and in the materials provided to the board, I have this information going back a lot further, but could cram 20 years worth of CPI into one slide. So just wanted to highlight the recent years where this issue has arisen from. So really looking at the third column here is the CPI that we're concerned about that's impacting retirees that is going into their COLA banking. You can see, especially in 2022, that at 8.81%. Then I'll get in a little more detail about this as we get to the actuarial analysis of how this has impacted retirees. Okay, so normally the actuaries would not provide a pricing until we get to the final briefing for the board. But we asked them if they could do that for this presentation just because of the nature of it and the question of what the board was really looking for is what would the cost be of paying out the COLA bank that we know retirees have this big bank built up. It's going to take years to deplete that and allow those members to catch up with their standard of living. So how much would it cost to pay that out immediately? And then the board could consider options after getting that information. So here was a detail about specifically what we asked the actuaries for, and then some information about their pricing. So I won't go over all of it, but just to highlight that it was to zero out the banks. So for existing retirees to take all of their bank and pay it out immediately. And so what the actuaries came back with was an assumed average COLA bank of 10% for all retirees. Then here we get to what everyone's wanting to see, the pricing estimate. And I should add that Mitch is available if there are detailed questions on this. But so the cost identified for paying the COLA banks out immediately is $650 million. And it would change the funded status from 102% to 98%. And what was kind of interesting about this was that the actual payout amount is not 650. It was actually $930 million, but there were $280 million in assumed savings because the actuaries were expecting, and we dealt with this during the funding method adoption, the contribution rate adoption a couple months ago, that they were changing their underlying assumption for retirees that the ongoing COLA would be at 3% for years down the road. So with emptying out those banks, they would no longer assume that, and instead they would change that assumption back to the existing long-term inflation assumption of 2.75%, and then that would result in this $280 million in savings in liabilities. So any questions on that part of the presentation before I move on?
Okay. Questions? Jacob, can I ask you, inside our packet, there's a detailed annual inflation chart that goes back to 2004.
Yeah.
And like you just mentioned on that column 3 that it describes the regional CPIW and going back through 2004, is that where they're kind of calculating that they have this large average bank of about 10% per person? Or
So really the 10% just comes from the recent years. It's really not going back that far. It's just in the last 3 or 4 years that bank's accumulated.
And so if a person retired in 23, obviously their bank's going to be less, correct? Yeah,
Yes.
They didn't have that big 8 point, whatever it was, 8.1.
Yeah, and that's where they came at an average of 10%.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So next steps in front of the board today. So the board could motion for a comprehensive briefing on this topic, or no further action at this time, or the board could defer action to next interim as another option too. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions or direction? Daryl?
I'd like to make a motion if there's no questions at this point, is to defer it move to defer it until the next interim.
So that would be our final then, Ray? Like just making sure our process.
That would mean we would bring it back to you next interim when we're setting the interim work plan.
Got it. Okay.
I'll second it.
Rena? Comments? Questions? Seeing none. Okay. Thanks, Daryl. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
All right, just looking at our agenda, I just want to bump this up real quick, Jacob, before you go. So we had item number 1 that we did not take care of because, thank you. Motion made and seconded to approve the minutes from the July meeting. Any discussion? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are adopted. Thank you. All right. Item number 3, which is salary setting responsibility update. Is that correct? I
Yes.
believe that's going to be Karen.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Again, to remind you of how this topic ended up on the agenda, there was board requested legislation last session to give the board some additional authority regarding setting salaries for certain board positions. We got direction from the board on how to proceed. And with a status report on that is Karen. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Karen.
Morning, Karen.
Good morning. For the record, Karen Durant, staff to the board. Steve did a good job presenting the background. The board received an update on the legislation that passed on salary setting for certain staff positions at the June meeting. The board passed a motion to contract with a third party to conduct market research consistent with the law. Our current status is we have contracted with an organization called Troop HR. Troop is Swedish for troop or team. We selected them because, one, they're a very highly ranked women-owned business in Oregon and does a lot of business in Oregon and Southwest Washington. And the Office of the State Actuary recently used them for similar market analysis for their positions. The scope of the work is to provide market comparability analysis for left staff positions consistent with the law, create a salary structure recommendations with ranges or bands, provide guidance for position placement within that structure, and make recommendation on future market analysis. That would include structure for position under the board's salary setting authority and would allow flexibility. This was important that the board recognized when we were going through all of that, to have flexibility in setting salaries to recognize special knowledge, skills, and experience. Next steps. The market analysis is in the final stages. As you can imagine, it's been fairly difficult to find comparable positions. And so we've gone through a number of iterations, and I think we have pretty good matches. We will hopefully have a detailed presentation at the October strategic planning meeting on the full scope of work. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Other questions? I do have on this presentation. Unfortunately, I will be in Charlottesville, Virginia. Found out it's not the greatest place to go, but that's where I'm going, I guess. Thanks, guys, for telling me about that afterwards. But do they make a recommendation? Do they? I mean, I know they provide the background and stuff, but are there recommendations that come along with that, or does that kind of stay out of that scope of work?
There will be no board action at October meeting. It will more be like creating the structure and then saying, in general, this is where you place positions. So if there are, for example, fully capable and have base knowledge of what the position would be, then you're usually setting that salary around the midpoint of a range. If they're bringing additional certifications, a lot of experience, those kinds of things, those positions are going to be placed near the top of the structure. So there'll be conversation like that. It's unclear whether they're going to be helping do the presentation or I'll just be doing it. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions?
This was one of the topics that came up in a lot of the one-on-ones. And so in the October meeting, we'll be having a follow-up on succession planning. And that'll include the same three components that we talked about last October, which is me, the team, and the building. And so this will be part of that team succession planning discussion in October, more detailed from Troop.
Thank you. Jacob, it looks like we are back to you. And item number 4 on our agenda is the authorized leave of absence, service credit, initial considerations. Steve?
Yeah, this is a topic that the board has been talking about in one way or another for a couple of years, trying to sort down exactly what the issue was. And it was on your work plan that you adopted earlier this year. And here to kind of kick off this year's discussion on this topic is Jacob.
Thank you. Once again, Jacob White, staff to the board. Last year this ended up being a very long presentation and towards the end of a very long meeting, and I could sense everyone glazing over. So I hope I've done a better job of distilling it this time around, although it is a complex issue with some different moving parts. So issue in front of the board is that some LEF 2 members are unable to purchase service credit when they're out on temporary non-duty disability leave because of the definition of basic salary and the requirements of purchasing service credit. No, that is a lot. So we'll get through this here. I'm going to walk through an example situation here of, I picked on Dennis last year. I'm picking on a different board member this year. A LEF 2 member tears his ACL while playing with his golden retriever and is out on an authorized leave of absence while recovering. Member uses paid leave while recovering from that injury. There we go. There he is. Member has private insurance to replace his income if he is injured outside of work. The member is required under the collective bargaining agreement to buy back the paid leave they have taken while they were out on temporary disability using their private insurance payments. The member does not return to work. Instead, they retire. A member in that situation does not receive service credit for the time they were out on authorized leave of absence and is unable to purchase service credit for that time. So I'm going to go into more detail about this. I know it's a big example to try to keep straight in your head, but dig into it a bit more here of the different components at play here. So the issue here is really the definition of basic salary. And in this situation, it gets confusing because the time the person is initially out is treated one way, but then after the buyback has occurred, it's treated a different way. And then after that, the purchasing of service credit comes into play too to further complicate it. So starting out, paid leave, real simple, paid leave is basic salary. That, however, so when the member is out initially, they're on paid leave, it's counted as basic salary. However, when the buyback program is used, it is the paid leave is backed out of the system, and instead it is counted as disability payment, workers' comp, private insurance, which is not basic salary. So at that point, the member is no longer receiving service credit for that time. Now, they may be able to purchase service credit for the time they bought back. And that's so if it's an authorized leave of absence. And so typically this would be an authorized leave of absence. And so how that purchase service credit works is, I'm going to kind of skip over the first bullet, which is for temporary duty disability, which has some different rules and focus on the non-duty. For the non-duty disability time, it would fall under the general authorized leave of absence purchase service credit law. And so this isn't just for non-duty injury. It applies, it's often used when people are out on maternity or paternity leave or a host of other scenarios. And the issue with this is that it can only be used if the member returns to work. So you have to return to work. Now, using leave counts as returning to work. So typically someone would be, if they took, they're out, they take leave, even if they do retire, when they use that leave, it counts as being back at work and they can purchase service credit under this. But in this scenario, because of the buyback option, that leave has been backed out of the system. They haven't actually taken any leave, and so they can't purchase service credit under the authorized leave of absence service credit law because they have not returned to work. And then here was just a breakdown. Like I said, I wasn't going into detail about the duty disability, but the duty disability is a better deal for members. Just from a policy perspective, they've been injured at work, and so the employer is responsible for paying contributions for that time. And if it's a non-duty disability injury or an authorized leave of absence, the employer is not responsible for paying any of the service credit or any of the contributions for the service credit. Instead, it is all paid by the member. But the benefit of the authorized leave of absence purchase service credit is that you're not paying the full actuarial cost. Instead, you're just paying the employer and the member contributions. And this was a question that I believe Representative Berquist asked last year, which was, well, what about the annuity options that the plan already has at the time of retirement? And that is correct. Members would have that option in this situation. They couldn't use the authorized leave of absence purchase service credit, but they still would have the ability to purchase service credit through the at retirement purchase service credit. These names get confusing. There's so much overlap. Or the purchase of an additional annuity. The difference with those is that the member is paying the full actuarial cost, so they're not getting quite the same benefit. And then also on top of it costing more, it's often, it's kind of a derogatory term for it, but it's often referred to as airtime, meaning that the member was not actually working at that time when you purchase the purchase service credit or purchase of additional annuity. And so it doesn't have the same, it doesn't apply to all of the components of their left to benefit. And so big examples of that would be the benefit enhancement that was passed, the service credit. When you purchase service credit at retirement, that doesn't go to your tiered multiplier or your lump sum benefit calculation or qualifying you for early retirement. But if you do purchase service credit through the authorized leave of absence, it does go to those things. So that's another difference between those two options. Okay, so I have some just title it possible solutions, but some policy options. So one of these isn't really a policy option for the board, but it is just a consideration that these buyback programs are in collective bargaining agreements. And that's definitely outside my area of expertise, but it may be a possibility to look at those agreements, and there could be changes made that would allow people in this specific situation to not use the buyback program. But I'm honestly at this point not well versed in how realistic of an option that is. And then the second policy option, more in the pension area, is there could be legislation to change authorized leave of absence purchase service credit eligibility requirements that would allow people in this very specific situation to be able to use that benefit, meaning that it could be changed so that it doesn't require them to return to work. That if they are out on this authorized leave of absence and then immediately retire, that they could have the option to use that purchase service credit option. And so next steps here, I had option 1 as a comprehensive report, and 2 is no further action. Like Steve said at the beginning, and I mentioned, we talked about this a lot last year. I think there was 2 or 3 presentations on it. So another option would be for the board to skip the comprehensive and ask for a final report on that policy option that was identified on the previous slide. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions? Go ahead.
the cost of this is to the member solely, correct?
Yes.
So there'd be, the impact wouldn't be on the employers or,
No, not with the one policy option. The member is responsible for the member and employer contributions. The only way that it could, it would impact the whole plan because it is slightly subsidized by not paying the full actuarial value, but also they're paying it immediately. They're purchasing that service credit immediately after they've been out on injury. So I would expect it to be a lower actuarial cost to the plan because it's not being purchased years after the fact. But there would be potentially some cost to the plan. But also, I'm at this point we don't have any data or haven't really worked with the actuaries on how common they think this very specific scenario actually is.
AJ, go ahead.
Yeah, Jacob, this might be a better question for L and I, but do you know if a torn ACL from a golden retriever is kind of covered under the presumptive statute, or is that?
I think it should just be a warning to all golden retriever owners, apparently, because there's two people I work with here who've had injuries from golden retrievers. So this is kind of a public service announcement from the Left 2 board.
The world's most dangerous dog breed.
Yes. And I'm afraid my Portuguese water dog is going to get me with some karma when I get home.
Thanks, AJ. Other comments? Questions, direction?
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead, Daryl.
If it's not necessary to have to move to comprehensive, I make a motion that we go ahead and move to final with possible legislation.
Motion's been made and seconded to move to final with possible legislation. Comments, questions? Seeing or hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Steve.
This next issue is new to the board. It was brought to the board's attention from one of the stakeholder groups early in the interim and was placed on the interim work plan regarding health insurance benefits for members who are on duty-related disability and then unable to return to work. And so they either have to, with that, I'll just leave it at that and let Jacob walk you through the different scenarios and options. There was an initial on this earlier, and this is the follow-up on that.
Hey, thank you. Once again, for the record, Jacob White, staff to the board. As Steve said, the issue here is that members who separate due to a duty disability only have temporary access to employer-provided health insurance through COBRA. Okay, so possible steps for a disabled Left 2 member. So the employee injured at work and unable to immediately return to duty. They would then go out on temporary duty disability. And I'll go into more detail. I have slides following this going into more detail on these different steps. So temporary duty disability. And then after that has been exhausted, they would have options. One of those options is Left 2 duty disability retirement. Another is authorized leave of absence. And then another one is not really their option, but employer at that time may terminate the employee's employment. If member duty disability retires, their right to return to their position is protected. So I just wanted to make sure that that part was clear, and I'll have a little more information about that as we move forward. Okay, temporary duty disability. So there's at this point, an employee, a member has L&I benefits, and those benefits include wage replacement, loss of earning power benefits, and they do qualify for medical care coverage. All of that is covered for care related to their workplace injury. And then there's the left two benefits, touched on it in the last presentation, but didn't go into detail. They would have the ability to purchase service credit for the time they're out, where as I mentioned, where the employer pays a portion of that cost, the employer contributions, and the member pays the member contributions. And then there is this other benefit that is not an L&I benefit or a left two benefit, that is really the benefit that was brought up in the letter from WACOPS to the board, which is the disability leave supplement benefit. So this benefit is paid by employers. It's not paid by through the left two trust fund. It's a separate statute. The employee under it must receive the base salary they would have received before the injury, and they're still have access to their employer health insurance plan. And now this, within the statute, it says it's for a maximum of 6 months, but it has been brought to our attention that there are employers where the employees have bargained with them to provide additional coverage beyond the 6 months. It's all anecdotal, so I don't know how common that is, and I've heard different numbers from 9 to 12 months. So after, touched on this already, but after the 6 months or longer is exhausted, and if the member has not recovered and has not been medically cleared and able to return to work, sometimes the employer allows them to be out on an authorized leave of absence. It sounds like there's a lot of cases of that while the person recovers. However, from the scenario that came to the board, the employer does have the ability to terminate that employee's employment. But an option that members have is that they can use the left two duty disability statute and retire, and that retirement can be temporary. And so often people think of retirement, of duty disability retire, that means your career's done and you're retired, and maybe you'll do something outside of left two. But the law does allow members to return to work once they've recovered. And it actually allows it for both duty disability and catastrophic disability, even though that would seem much less likely to occur with someone who's been catastrophically disabled. But it is possible. And so the duty disability law doesn't have a minimum amount of time that you meet those qualifications of being being eligible for duty disability retirement. However, to be catastrophically disabled, it has to be expected to be a year or longer. And so the other thing I wanted to highlight about the differences between duty and catastrophic that come into play here is that under duty disability, the left two does not reimburse members for their health insurance premiums. However, under catastrophic, members do receive reimbursements for those premiums. Sorry, there was something else I wanted to say about duty disability. It'll come back to me. So when a member returns from duty disability retirement, so if a duty or catastrophic disability retiree recovers, the member may choose to return to their previous position at the same salary and rank they previously held, and the employer is required to rehire them. So that going back to that scenario where the person's still recovering, they're concerned about losing their position. Employer wants to terminate their position, just can't, for whatever reason, can't keep the position on hold for them. The left two member does have the ability to protect that position and their salary, and through the left two duty disability retirement. So I worked with DRS to and they were able to run a report for me, and there were only 4 instances since this benefit was created, going back to the beginning of the board, where someone has duty disability, retired, recovered, and returned to their left 2 position. So it's not commonly used. I don't know if that's because people don't recover, or they're not interested in returning once they do, or if it's just not something that people are aware of that might find themselves in this situation.
Jacob, question?
Yeah.
Is there an age limitation on this? So if a person was past 53, if they were older than 53 years, could they?
There is not in the statute, so there's nothing in the statute about that. I don't believe there is in the DRS WACs or anything either. So yeah, I've never heard that come up as an issue.
Okay.
I will say I do just have personal experience that a couple of people who had recovered and tried to return to work, that there were some issues with the employer initially, some disagreement about whether they were recovered or not. But eventually, I think in the 2 examples that I was aware of, they did end up returning to that work or to that position.
Then Berquist, go ahead.
Thanks. Question, sounds like 4 have returned, but what are the numbers we're talking about with who have taken advantage of the duty disability retirement?
Ooh. See if Steve can help me out on that. I don't know off the top of my head.
The last valuation report, if I'm remembering correctly, the numbers are around 56 a year, I think, is the current assumption for duty disability as opposed to catastrophic. I think that the assumptions in that area, 56 to 60 maybe. Going off my memory, but I think that's the range.
And I did want to add, that's what I forgot earlier, was that I think part of, might be in a later slide, but with duty disability, one of the, I believe the policy reasons for not having the medical premiums reimbursed is that people who qualify for that are able to work in non-left positions. And so they would be reasonable to believe that they would be able to get health insurance coverage through whatever non-left employment they're able to do. So when when an employee does not have any more access to their employee and to their employer health insurance, how do they pay for that? How do duty disability members and others pay for their insurance if they're not being reimbursed the premiums? And so one of the options available to public employees and left 2 members is the VEBA account. It varies from employer whether they have access to VEBA and then how much money they can put into it. Typically, people are able to put their paid leave at the end before they retire. Whatever excess paid leave they have at that time, they can convert that into their VEBA account and use for health insurance once they retire. So it's not really designed for people who go out earlier than expected with duty-related injuries, but it still may be an option. And then firefighters have the medical expense reimbursement plan. They have this through their union, it's a 501c9 tax-exempt union-sponsored plan. Allows firefighters to save for retirement medical expenses, and they do have an option in it for disability retirees to get early access. So that is an option. But law enforcement at this time does not have a plan like that. So in summary, duty disability retirement allows qualified members to temporarily retire until they have recovered from their injuries and provides those members with return rights to their position and salary. Once again, just wanted to highlight that because I believe that was one of the concerns raised in the initial letter, and may be an option for members who are not aware of it. And then also, duty disability does not provide members with continued access to employer-provided health insurance. So even if someone is able to take advantage of that, it doesn't necessarily it does provide them some money to help pay for these expenses, but it does not reimburse them like catastrophic duty disability does for their health insurance premiums. So the policy options in front of the board today, option 1 is reimburse duty disability health insurance premiums through LEOFF 2. So the pros of this would be it aligns duty disability with catastrophic duty disability, takes care of people in the situation I described on the previous slide. The cons are the increased costs to the plan. There are a lot more duty disability retirees than there are catastrophic. And also, like I said earlier, the policy of a duty disability retiree still being able to, part of that qualification is that you are able to work still. So they may be able to get another job, which gives them access to health insurance. And if they're not able to get another job, then that's where catastrophic disability is supposed to come into play and provide that for them. The other option would be to extend that temporary duty disability benefit from 6 to 12 months. The thought being there that it would allow more members to recover from injuries, that it might not be realistic for people who've suffered a severe injury to recover in 6 months, that 12 months might be more realistic. The con with this is that it's not a LEOFF 2 benefit. And so if the LEOFF 2 board was to propose an extension of this benefit, it may need to pay that benefit through LEOFF 2 instead of through the employer. So some employers, and then like I said, some employers already offer extended temporary duty disability benefits. So this could interfere with those agreements and may not be seen as necessary by those LEOFF 2 members who've already bargained for extended coverage with their employer. So next steps in front of the board today is that the board may motion to receive a final briefing. If you'd like to do that, if you could identify one of the policy options on the previous slide to be priced, work with the actuaries on that. And then the board, option 2 would be that the board may not take any action at this time. No motion is required for that, but I know often the board does go ahead and motion for that, just for the record. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Carol? Sure. This was proposed by one of the stakeholders. Did they offer a solution or a direction that they wanted to go, or was it just proposed that we as LEOFF board come up with a solution for it?
Yeah, my understanding was it was proposed as wanting to use this as a resource to research this further and identify what the underlying policy issues were and whether it was something that would be appropriate for retirement or not, but just to assist them in having more information about the different parts of it.
So if I recall, this was a specific incident involving an officer that was injured, and he was on duty disability. And at the point that the agency, their 6 months, they said, okay, you're off of this. And he went on, I'm guessing, either self-insured or L&I. And then he couldn't afford his medical insurance for his family.
Yes, that was the concern.
Okay.
Go ahead, Senator.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jacob, I'm not going to throw you under the bus for this. This has to go to Steve because you've got the institutional memory that goes back before the board in your multiple capacities. So this is one of those kind of a convoluted questions here that Lisa Wan would roll her eyes at.
Okay.
So go back.
Fair warning.
We're talking about having a fiscal impact one way or the other, maybe the board, maybe somebody else, maybe the employers, this kind of thing. All of a sudden, you're going to have possibly a difference of opinion between the people involved and the people bearing the cost on this. When you go back to LEOFF 1, what evolved was a local medical board that reviews disability out there to determine if somebody qualifies. And along the way, 40 years ago, we had differences of opinion where the medical board has come up with this determination. DRS has come up with the opposite determination. Again, all of a sudden, you end up having to find a way to get past that impasse. Are we creating not just the cost of the benefit itself, but are we creating the necessity for some sort of an infrastructure to be able to create that form and process these things as they come up as to differences of opinion between the different players in this situation that we're not anticipating.
There's a fair question there. The initial determination is made by L&I because we're only talking about duty disability. So to start with, the question about whether somebody's disabled and whether they're in the line of duty, the infrastructure exists. But if you've got a continuing benefit, like say medical, does it make sense then to have some kind of continuing oversight to make sure that that member actually remains disabled? Jacob pointed out, I think we're having, just using my numbers off my top of my head, 60 members a year going out on duty disabilities, and yet we've only had 4 going back in the last 20 years that returned to work. So why is that? Would it make sense if you're going to pay for medical to follow up to see, like Jacob said, do they have medical under another job? If they've gone to work in another job and they've got medical through that, should the plan be paying for it? So some kind of follow up. There's no age. Somebody could go out on a duty disability at age 30. And not be eligible until their 60s for Social Security. So what is the appropriate level of oversight for people who are in that, that right now there is none. DRS doesn't do any type of oversight of regular duty disability retirements to ensure or to verify their disabled status like they do with catastrophic. So if that was going to be the responsibility of DRS, that would be a new responsibility, and given the numbers, a fairly significant one as well. There are no independent boards like you're talking that exist in LEOFF 1. Right now, the only L&I doesn't do any follow-up or monitoring in this kind of sense. So the only structure out there that you could piggyback on the existing structure would be DRS. They could, similar to what they do for catastrophic. But again, now you're talking about significant numbers, and whereas in catastrophic, a lot of the members, their nature of their injuries are such there's no expectation they're ever going to return to work. Most duty disability retirees, one, they are capable of some work. It's just not police or fire work. So there's already kind of a judgment that goes in there. So verifying whether or not a member 10 years later could theoretically return to work as a firefighter or a law enforcement officer might be a little bit more challenging. In addition to just the numbers, that actual determination could be more challenging as well. But as far as structure goes, off the top of my head, Senator, I think the only thing that's out there now would be kind of piggybacking on the DRS catastrophic review process that already exists and extending it to these situations.
So it's kind of a follow-up on that to go the other side of the coin. How about if you have a situation where an employer after 6 months decides to terminate somebody because they can't return to the position, and yet definitionally they don't meet the requirement for disability and that kind of thing. I mean, there has to be
we
some
had
processing here.
The board actually recommended a bill several years ago for exactly the situation that you are talking about, that Jacob mentioned, where a lot of times there's a disagreement between the member and the employer about whether the person is eligible to return to work. Under current law now, the member can continue to receive their duty disability retirement during that period of time while their eligibility to return to work is being determined through labor processes or even in some cases the courts. So they would have their duty disability benefits in that situation, but no medical.
Other comments? Go ahead.
Just to,
Hold on. I'm sorry. AJ, did you have something? Did I miss you?
Yeah. I'm kind of torn about this because, you know, that we had that member in Bellevue who crashed from his motorcycle. It was all over the news. I think that's kind of where this came from. And that was awful. That was completely awful that they were going to cut him off from his insurance benefits. I'm not sure that this is an issue that should be brought to the Left 2 board. This seems like something that we could maybe solve through legislation through the workers' comp system, but I'm not sure. I feel like I need some time to think about this, and I would recommend that we take no action this time so we can kind of mold this over for a couple more months and try to come up with the best answer to this problem instead of just moving forward with the options provided.
Okay, thank you. Daryl?
I would follow up with that as well, but I will reach out to the stakeholder. I know that in this case, in that Linwood case, they come to a resolution in that. But I will reach out to the stakeholder, talk to them about it, see if they're where they're at on the with this current situation, and follow up with them. And if there's something more that they have, like a direction or something better, then we can talk that out and come back with that maybe at a later time.
Thank you. I know that our Left 2 staff and team has attended a number of our stakeholder groups, you know, their meetings, and their participation often is very valuable because they're not hearing it just from maybe the same group you're bringing in and your level of expertise. And so maybe as we move forward and start to think about options, because as Jacob presented, is that we have some locals that have 6 months, or some unions, guilds have 6 months, and then some have 9 or 12. Maybe part of a presentation through our education is that we bring in some example contract language, some language that maybe we help our people with, maybe identify this even at the local level to try to solve this problem. I don't know. I mean, I think, like you said, is that what is really the issue right now? Can we solve this a different path? And as AJ just mentioned, if it's legislative and we have to go down through a different group or agency, we may have to do that as well.
That might be a good option, or a good solution for the stakeholders to, at their conferences, is to come up with that and kind of put out a questionnaire to get a consensus on what everyone has. Yeah. And maybe they come to everybody collectively would come to this is the best option out there, and then move forward with it. But because I think it's all over the board, and having been on that side of the coin and being medically retired, there are many options available to you if you know where to look.
So by saying nothing,
do we need a motion just to move it? I mean, just to have it on record?
He recommended.
AJ.
Yeah.
But I'll go ahead and make a motion that we take no action at this time, and go from there.
Is there a second? Motion's been made and seconded to take no further action. And I say I understand that. No take action at this time. Discussion? Seeing or hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries.
All right, that concludes the presentations. There's a few things I wanted to cover quickly on the administrative update. One, In your interim work plan, there was an issue that the board has discussed for a couple of years related to the benefit that's called the month of death benefit. Last year, that was agency request legislation, and it was supported by the Select Committee on Pension Policy, and the board chose to support it as well. The Select Committee on Pension Policy did take action to endorse that legislation again for the upcoming session. Earlier this interim, the board voted to follow the lead, if you will, of the Select Committee and support anything that they brought forward. Under that, that would not be a board endorsement, but it would be, if asked or if I testified, it would be in support of the SCPP bill, which does include left two. So that's FYI of where things sit. We've been going through the expectation interview process, almost completed, got a couple left to do, and we'll have the update on the results of all of that at the October meeting. We've had some there's some stakeholder outreach that we told you about before that has occurred, which is the Washington State Council of Firefighters Retiree Association. Their retiree board had a meeting. They asked Jacob and I to be there, and we did a little Q&A with them. So that was the first time that we've had a chance to meet and talk with that group. The WACOPS general membership meeting was a couple weeks ago in Kennewick. Jacob was there to make a presentation, and the ombudsman, Tammy and Jessica, both attended and had an outreach table there. By way of mentioning too, just as a shout out, Jessica recently completed her year training period as an ombudsman. That was September 1. So now she's official as an ombudsman, and she also attended the CAP program that's through the IFEBP and successfully passed her CAP exams as well. So congratulations there. I don't know how many of you have taken those CAP tests, but those of you who have know how challenging they are. We've got some trustee education coming up. NCPERS has their annual public safety conference at the end of October. There's already several board members signed up to be there. We'll have some staff there as well. And FYI, Jacob will be doing a presentation at that conference. And so he'll be talking about the recent benefit improvement that was passed in Washington. In particular, how you guys, the strategies that you guys use to build up support and pay for that benefit improvement. The IFEBP at the in the middle of November will have their annual benefits conference, and again, we've got several trustees and staff attending that. I know they have a gigantic agenda with a lot of different choices of classes. Several of you have asked me for references about which classes to take. Talk to Tim. That's the answer that I've given all of you guys. He is the IFEBP guru and actually had a part in selecting a lot of these, who was presenting a lot of these, and has had a chance to review their materials. So any insight on which classes would be the best, he's your guy. That concludes my administrative update. The next meeting, Mr. Chair, is October 23rd. That's the board strategic planning meeting. We'll be doing it here. But again, the strategic planning meetings, we typically don't do action items at those meetings. It's more built around discussion. Some of the items that we'll be talking about, just so that you know, some of the you had asked for a update on long-term risks to the plan. So we'll be working with the actuary to talk about what that looks like. What are, instead of just some of the risks that you might be thinking about in the next 2 or 3 or even 5 years, what longer term risks, if you are out there. And then similarly, I mentioned earlier, we'll be doing a succession planning follow-up. There'll be a couple of other presentations as well, but those will be 2 key ones. Any board member who wants to attend in person, just remember, travel, all of your expenses, that kind of stuff we cover. So if you want to attend that meeting in person, we can make that happen. Just let us know. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Steve? All right. And then the final, regarding our public comment, staff received no comments in advance of today's meeting for distribution to the board, so we had nobody send us anything, and no other action will be taken. Entertain a motion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Motion's been made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Are adjourned. All right. Thank you very much.